Hello and welcome to Eco-Terrorism. I'm Zeinab Bailoun. The forests of the world are gradually disappearing and very few people are doing anything to stop it. Joining us today in the studio to discuss this issue is Mrs. Patricia Sfeir, IndyACT's Executive Director. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you.
So before we start our discussion for today, here's a report related to the issue.
Deforestation can best be described as the removal of a forest or stand of trees where the land is thereafter converted to a non-forest use. In November 2013, COP19 Climate Change Conference held its annual international conference in Warsaw, Poland, with much hope but fewer actions. November 2013 also marked the massive and devastating typhoon's hurricane, which swept across the Philippines, leaving thousands dead and tens of thousands homeless. Much has been said about the strong link between typhoons in the Philippines and the climate change. Accordingly, one issue intersecting both global warming and extreme weather has received little attention regarding how changes to the natural landscape may be putting public health at greater risk, and how does deforestation contribute to such change in this regard. Among the negative effects of deforestation that people might experience is the increase of greenhouse gases and its role in global warming. As forests play a very vital role in these cycles, the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere acts as a blanket which traps long-wave radiation of heat and prevents it from escaping the surface of the Earth back into the atmosphere. Today, forests cover 30% of the world's land area. However, from 2000 to 2005, gross deforestation continued at a rate of 12.9 million hectares per year. What will the future of our environment look like in the next few decades? And what should individuals and governments do to fight deforestation?
So to start with, Mrs. Sfeir, what exactly is deforestation and why is it something negative?
Deforestation is an act that actually removes all kind of vegetation and especially forest from any production. So it's basically made out of it's affected by various factors, and these factors are most of them related to the socio-economic activity of the humankind, and they are mostly human-induced activities.
What sorts of negative effects does this have on people, on the environment, on different aspects?
It's negative effect. It's because the forest in general are what we call, and what has already been mentioned, are carbon sinks, which means they are the reservoirs of the organic carbon that we have. So when you talk about pollution, we talked about excessive emissions of CO2. And what the forests do usually, they neutralize this CO2. So they reverse the pollution effect. And why the deforestation has a negative effect, it's because it has a positive effect on the pollution. It increases pollution and does not limit or does not work on limiting the CO2 effect, which is the greenhouse gases. So this has an effect
on the air that we breathe?
Yeah, sure.
What about the rest of the environment in terms of animals, plants, natural habitats?
When you talk about forests, we talk about an ecosystem. And when you talk about ecosystem, we talk about all the fauna and the flora that exist and the animals that are already found a habitat inside the forest. So when you are removing a forest or you are having a deforestation activity, it means you are removing a whole ecosystem. And by this, you are creating an imbalance in the natural system that already exists on Earth.
How are we seeing this in Lebanon or in the wider Middle East?
When we talk about forest, usually it's not well, there is no high impact on the Middle East, because most of the Middle Eastern countries, they have limited forest, if no forest at all. But when you talk about Lebanon, yes, Lebanon suffered from a loss of around 7% of its forest area, of its green cover, and this is part of deforestation. And deforestation is very much related to desertification. So when you talk about combating climate change, combating desertification, it's about combating deforestation in a way. So yes, we're suffering a lot in Lebanon, and probably we're not highly seeing the effect out of it, but its impact is very drastic on the coming years. And we started feeling the changes in the climate cycles, the changes in the temperature, the changes in the precipitation, its distribution, its rate, and so on. All of this is also affected by climate change, which is affected mainly and caused by deforestation.
So when did this process start?
The deforestation? Oh, I don't think there is a starting date for this. This is an ongoing process.
But specifically the human the man-made aspect.
It's basically with the urbanization. That's the major factor that we talk about. Urbanization, it's about removing all kind of forests and like having new habitats for people is the major cause of deforestation. That's one thing. Secondly, when we talk about deforestation, it's very much linked to desertification. So desertification means less precipitation, means also less biodiversity and loss of existing animals or whatever natural or living life on Earth is existing. So all of this is kind of related. And when we talk about deforestation, it's a major, I mean, there are so many factors that are affecting deforestation that actually it's a combination of everything. But it's much more pronounced in third world countries actually, because it's very much related to the socioeconomic conditions of the population.
So before we continue our discussion, let's take a look at the second report for today, which describes the impact of deforestation on animals.
Tropical rainforests contain 80% of the world's biodiversity. The loss of even one species can ruin an entire forest ecosystem of plants and animals. Deforestation destroys 137 plant, animal, and insect species every day, totaling 55,000 species a year. $13 million hectares of forest are lost each year, 6 million hectares of which are forests that have been largely undisturbed by man.
So what would you say are the main effects of deforestation on animals specifically?
The main effects?
Of deforestation on animals.
It's loss of their natural habitat, and they like migrate to other areas, which most of the times they become like invading species. So it's a reversal effect and a negative one.
Where do we see some of the biggest examples of this? Would you say in South America, for example, there have been such cases?
Yeah, especially with the rainforest, because you have like very dense forests, and the ecosystem is very much equilibrated and very much diverse, that it creates a real imbalance to the system. And yes, it creates problems in other areas because animals have to migrate to other areas and they become like either like minor species or major species, so they invade or they are like extincted.
So say we continue in the way that we're continuing right now in Lebanon or around the rest of the world, what are some of the most extreme effects that we can expect to see over the next 50, 100 years?
Since desertification is very much linked to climate change, and you started with a very interesting report about climate change, I believe it's going to be very drastic, and it was very much pronounced in the COP19 in Poland like a month ago, that actually no one cares. That's the problem. We're fighting for increasing a small percentage of forest in all the world, and the leaders are like fighting for something else, and no one cares about what's going to happen with the population. And the big example of Philippines, what actually happened in Philippines is a major result of climate change. So there is no more than this proof to say that yes, climate change is real. Climate change is more and more being very important, very pronounced, and its effects are very drastic to the local communities, to the different also countries. So yes, we need to do something. What I expect in the coming 50 years, I don't want to be very negative, but there's nothing to be really. I mean, there is nothing to really. Give us a flair that okay, we will be living in a better environment. I hope so. I don't know. There should be a decision to be taken. We're waiting 2015, the major COP, the major conference of parties that is going to mark a new decade in fighting climate change.
But haven't we been waiting for these conferences every time we haven't exactly seen any big change? What exactly do you think has been the main obstacle standing in the way of these conferences actually forcing countries to make a change?
Politics and economics.
Why?
Why? That's the name of the game. I mean, politics and economics. If you look at the world like in its different sections or dimensions, you would see that it's always about politics and it's always about economics. And when you have like an example of Philippines, so many thousand people that are left without any shelter, and hundreds of people that died because of a climate change action or activity or disaster, and no one has really agreed to like change a little bit of its emissions or just adapt its action plan to have lower emissions. No one. I mean, even Japan, during the first days of the conference, they just stood up and they said, okay, we're not able to limit our emissions. We're not able to reduce our emissions, actually. Why? It's because it's about economics. Because if they have to reduce their emissions as developed countries, they would have to limit also their economic profit out of this. But we as third world countries, let's put it this way, I don't want to say more than that. Third world countries, we're in the process of development. We're not allowed to increase our emissions in a way. And we have also to pay the bills that these developed countries are really making. I mean, this is not fair. I'm sure it's not fair. And more than that, we are the ones that are being killed.
It's an issue of power politics.
Power and politics and economics. It's all about
we'll come back to this issue right after the break. Okay. But before we go off for a short break, here's some facts about deforestation. International news agencies say that the rate of deforestation in the Amazon increased by 28% between August 2012 and last July, after years of decline. The Associated Press says that about half of Indonesia's rainforests have already been destroyed. And scientists say that future expansion of the global agricultural land base will clear tropical forests. We'll be back after the short break. Stay tuned.
The crisis of capitalism, the European impasse, the energy shortages, the emerging power of Asia, the economic power of the Arab world, the economic debate, informative, revealing, and progressive. It discusses the economic event of the world.
Economic debate, where the numbers reveal the truth.
So, Mrs. Sfeir, as we were talking previously about the issue of COP19 and power politics, and what exactly do you think it will take for there to actually be a difference in this issue? Do you think it will need, a difference on the part of different governments that are taking part in this conference? Do you think we need more pushing from activists? Do you think we need more public awareness? What do you think is the problem? What do you think we need to do?
We need to do everything, actually. We need to raise awareness among populations, to exert pressure as civil society on the leaders in our countries before going to the conference of parties. That's one thing. Secondly, yes, we need to really push the leaders to come with a different mind, not for negotiation, but like for setting a new standards or new limits for whatever actions it is. I know there is an economic crisis all over the world, but it's going to last anyway. So like a minus 1% of economic return to be invested in something related to fighting climate change and deforestation. I mean, it's not a big issue. Actually, the whole COP19 in Warsaw was built and with the objective of working on the finance of mitigating and adapting to climate change effects. But no one reached the level of like discussing the finance issues. We always end up, I mean, the final conclusions of any kind of conference is like providing new funds, new donors, new funds for fighting climate change. However, during the whole year, you wouldn't really hear about these funds. It's only about pledges, but no one is really like, investing in fighting climate change. However, who's paying who's paying the bill at the end? These are the poor people in the poorest countries.
So you're saying that developing countries are basically paying for the mistakes of developed countries.
Yes.
Why exactly is this happening? Why are they agreeing to this?
It is happening because the developed countries, they made their whole way of evolution and development to reach a certain level of economic stability, if you would say it. But this had a very important expenses on the environment itself. So now it's our turn to really reach this level of development. However, we have to limit also our emissions. So this is really not a fair deal for the developing countries. And we always said, okay, you want us to reduce our emissions and not to really develop with the rate we want to develop, or we have the ability and the capacity to develop, fine. You need to compensate in a way. Compensating it through having like projects that would limit the emissions and try to counteract these effects. And that's the main issue. We're not getting the funds to fight for adaptation and mitigation, and at the same time, we're not allowed to really go into development the way we see we can do it.
Where exactly do you think Lebanon stands on the scale?
Of
developing countries that are being forced to pay for these mistakes that developed countries are making?
Okay, despite everything, Lebanon is not an emitting country. We're still below the level of emissions that the level of an alarming level. So the threshold, we didn't reach it yet, which means we are in a safe side. Secondly, in Lebanon, we don't have like a major industry that would really pollute a lot of the environment. So we're kind of, I don't want to say safe, but I mean, we're not in a red state. Okay, so but this doesn't mean that we can do whatever we want. No, and deforestation is one of the main issues. We can really fight climate change with it. That's one thing. Reducing pollution, and when you talk about pollution, we talk about transport. The transport sector is one of the, I think it's the first sector that pollutes the environment in Lebanon. So it's the most polluting sector in our case. So we also need to have a sustainable transportation system, for example. When we talk about all of these, we come to an integrated package that we need to really develop. It's about introducing new practices. And when we talk about new practices, we talk about a new lifestyle that we need to raise awareness about it among the children, among the families, the population in general. And for this, I mean, we fight, as IndyACT, we fight a lot for low carbon development practices, which includes transportation, which includes the introduction of renewable energy, which also includes reforestation as one of the major issues, reducing waste production. All of these contribute to a better environment, and what we mean by better environment, fighting climate change also.
So we'll discuss more about IndyACT right after we take this phone call from Bassam Cantata, a journalist and a political and environmental analyst who is joining us by phone from Beirut. First of all, thanks for joining us today.
Welcome.
What exactly did COP19 do to deal with this issue? Have previous conferences done anything substantial?
Well, the issue of deforestation is on the agenda of all the international events, as you know. And for sure, tackling such an important issue is part of the international concern for the UN and for international organizations and for governments, for sure.
What would you say is standing in the way of progress on the issue of deforestation? Would you say that COP19 was unsuccessful necessarily?
Well, for sure, the RED program of in the UN, the major description for this program, or the major critic for this program actually during the negotiations was related to how much the program is unable to monitor the real impact of the funding for the forest, especially in the red countries. Actually, the countries that already the program funded a lot of money in order for regaining the forests and helping local people for protecting the forests and monitoring how much really the forests are being protected from illegal trade. When we are speaking about corruptions, we are speaking about the big gangs and smugglers that they are spreading among countries and collaborating with local police and local governments in order to let the UN monitoring program unable to track them and to know exactly how much they are damaging the nature. This is a major issue in the end that has been discussed, and especially that there was a lot of funds from Western countries in Brazil, in Indonesia, and in a lot of other countries, and in the revision their impact was not that much in order to their evaluation didn't reach the minimum level that it's already needed in order to face climate change or deforestation interference in climate change.
What exactly is your expectation of the future in this regard, and what about the Middle East region specifically?
Well, as you know, Middle East is not part of the RED program in the UN, but for sure our region lack a lot of interventions in regarding to the deforestation and forestation, actually, because there is a lot of deserts in the Arab world and a lot of mountains that they are losing their soil and their trees, and this is for sure will contribute more to the climate change and to the CO2 emissions in our region. As you know, per year there is more than 13 million hectares of deforestation in the world, and the share of the Arab world from this amount is very small, but this will for sure affect the global trend of the climate change, and governments in the region are aware of this. There is some programs of forestation, for example, in Lebanon. For sure, your guest spoke about the future and upcoming programs for the Ministry of Agriculture for deforestation of Lebanon. And also there is some programs in the region, in Jordan, in Syria, and also in Gulf countries. But relating it to the climate change negotiations, we are out of the agenda when we are speaking about deforestation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bassam Cantata. Thanks for joining us by phone today. We'll be back to our guest in the studio, Mrs. Sfeir. Can you comment on what Mr. Kantar told us about this issue specifically?
It's very true that the Middle East and Lebanon, they're not part of the RED negotiations. When we mean by RED, it's about reducing emissions from desertification. This is a committee that actually negotiates about what can be done in this issue. And usually the major countries are the ones that have the rainforest and the tropical forest. So in our case, when we talk about, 70,000 hectares and 100,000 hectares, I mean, it's not a big issue to talk about it. That's why we don't have an impact on this, and we're not participating in these issues. However, if I go back to the Lebanese context and I would look at our forests, at this stage we're still studying what can be done with the RED issue in Lebanon with our forests, because reducing emissions from our forests is not yet sure that we can do it, especially in amounts that are considerable to be accounted for. When we talk about, reducing emissions, we're talking about carbon credits, we're talking about neutralization and so on. So all these carbon offsets, we need to really account them or count them in a way to see if they are economical or not. At this stage, we don't have yet the capacity to do it. We're still under study in this issue. However, I'm very positive about it because I think that's one of the things that Lebanon can really sell to other countries, other neighboring countries, is reducing their emissions through reforestation or through forestation.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sfeir. We have a few points here we're going to be talking about. Between 1960 and 1990, most of the deforestation occurred globally, with an increasing trend every decade. Brazil has the highest annual rate of deforestation today, and the Atlantic coast of Brazil has lost 90 to 95% of its rainforests. Central America has lost 50% of its rainforests, and South America has lost 70%. That's it for today. I'd like to thank Mrs. Sfeir for joining us today, and Mr. Kantar for joining us by phone as well. Thanks for joining us on Eco-Terrorism. I'm Zeinab Bailoun. See you next week.